It is Monday, June the 23rd, 2025. I'm in San Francisco on the west coast of the United States. The news, certainly on the west coast, at least according to The Guardian, is not very cheerful. According to one piece in this morning's Guardian, many immigrants or migrants, I don't know what is the best word to describe communities in heavily immigrant towns, are terrified to leave their house. Immigrants are disappearing from their streets. I was particularly touched by a story actually from Oregon of a man who'd been here about 40 years who was disappeared through ICE. Meanwhile, not all the news is bad. Khalil is back, the kidnapped, it would seem, Palestinian taken at Columbia University. Was one of the first stories. One person who's been following the story of ICE and of immigrants and ICE is my guest today. Rafia Zakaria is the author of 4 interesting books, including her latest one, Against White Feminism. And she's also the author of an intriguing piece in this month's Liberties Quarterly, old friends of mine, Silencing the Transformation of the American Public Sphere. Rafia is joining us from Indiana, where they are mourning the loss of the National Basketball Tournament. Although, Rafia, I know you're not particularly into basketball, are you?
No, not at all.
You've been in this country.
You're not allowed to say that in Indiana. So, hey, I'm into basketball.
Well, I know you've been in this country since you were born in Pakistan. You came here as a 17-year-old. You've been here you've been here around 30 years, without wishing to give away your age. But do you feel American, Rafia?
Definitely. This is the place where I've lived most of my life, all my adult life. It's where I've had a family. It's where my friends are. Of course, as an immigrant, you always carry, a sense of rootlessness with you wherever you are. It's the unfortunate burden of being an immigrant is, the place that's imprinted on you when you're born is not the place where you make your home. But yes, I definitely consider the United States my home. I cannot really imagine living anywhere else.
Are you disappointed then with what's going on? I mean, maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe you might choose a different word. I mean, I sense quite a degree of anger in this piece, Silencing the Transformation of the American Public Sphere. What word would you use to summarize what your response, your reaction, your emotions about what's happening in America today, particularly in terms of immigrant communities?
Yeah, I mean, I would use the word devastation and anguish to describe how I feel. And I realize that, my feelings are somewhat underscored, not simply because I'm an immigrant, but also because, I have practiced immigration law. And so my background is in immigration law. So I spent a great many years convincing people to follow, as it were, immigration laws, and to see what's happening where immigration, which is a civil matter, has suddenly been transformed into or is being attempted to be transformed into a criminal issue. And also the fact that law-abiding people who have followed all the immigration laws, something that, like I said, as a lawyer, I spent a great deal of time underscoring, are being detained willy-nilly, are being harassed, are being silenced. You're correct in saying that I feel a great deal of rage, honestly, to see what's going on.
In the piece, you talk about the protests in the beginning of the piece in Liberties, the LA protests. You talk about not being particularly surprised by what you call the Trump administration's draconian immigration policies. Did you expect them then? Is there anything that has surprised you?
I would say that the venom and vehemence with which lawful permanent residents, especially, are, and in some cases, US citizens, are being harassed and detained has been shocking to me because there is no legal basis for that. And the administration knows that. But it's following what I see as the overarching Trump administration strategy, which is that break something or hurt someone first and then think about it later. So the strategy, as you saw in Mahmoud Khalil's case as well, is that, oh, well, we'll throw them in detention. And then, of course, they'll have to scramble and sell their houses or whatever to get a lawyer to defend them, and then eventually we'll have to release them because we don't have a basis to keep them. But in the meantime, we would have terrified a whole number of people. So it's kind of a terrorist act on the part of the Trump administration, which knows that eventually they'll have to release the people. But why not cause them as much pain and harassment as possible in the meantime?
Yeah, it's interesting you choose to use the T word, terrorism. Of course, it's also used by the Trump administration, particularly in terms of what's happening now in Gaza and in Iran. Should we be careful with that word, the T word, Rafia, or is the Trump administration and ICE, are they, in your mind at least, terrorists?
Well, when you are carrying out actions that have no legal basis and whose intent is to terrify people, not simply the people who are the direct targets of the action, but also people who are witnessing those actions, which is, the general theme of the piece is that the wide-ranging effects of these actions. I think it's justified to use the word terror for them because that's precisely the emotion that they precipitate in the hearts and minds of the people who are now having to witness this day after day.
Is this conscious terrorism, or is it somehow
Absolutely.
an accidental consequence of what they're doing?
No, I mean, my friend Jean Guerrero has written an excellent book on Stephen Miller, who's the architect.
Yeah, and Jean's actually been on the show a few
Yeah,
years ago,
and
a couple of times.
and I think if you read the book, it's very, very easy to see, and if you just follow the news, quite frankly, that this is a very intentional act, that the architecture of this system has been very deliberately manufactured, and the intent is to terrify anybody who might even think of coming to the United States because its architect Stephen Miller rabidly hates immigrants and hates people who are not white. And so, so now it's almost like, Trump has given him kind of carte blanche to do whatever it is that he would please with these, with immigration regulations. And so, it's very intentional because you also have to remember that they're using the fact that immigration regulations and these policies can be changed, can be directed without any kind of because of the Administrative Procedures Act, it can all be done as an administrative procedure. It doesn't have to go through either the Congress or the Senate. And so you have this, you have an architecture of terror that's being laid out through the immigration system. And it's a very clever move because, the vast majority of Americans, of course, are not direct immigrants. They haven't been through the immigration process. They might not even know someone who has been through the immigration process. So it's a way of othering everybody who has gone through the process or is going through the process, and is so it's creating a bifurcated system of rights within the country, which is precisely what Stephen Miller intends.
Well, presumably, Rafia, you went through the system
Right.
formally. I did, although it was quite a few years ago, embarrassing amount of years ago. How would you respond to the argument, certainly put forward by the Trump people and even some Democrats, that the people who in this country who are undocumented, we can mess around with language, but people who are not under the US law allowed to be here, that they are at least in part responsible for what's happening, in the sense that they've broken the law, or at least they broke the law in terms of coming into this country, and they have to accept the consequences?
Look, I can't make a blanket statement for all the people who've come in this country who are undocumented, because the circumstances of each case are different. And I'm not condoning breaking the law, but I do think that it's important to remember that even if they might have done that, borders in a sense are, they're creations, they're part of the nation state. But a person does not become a criminal because they do not follow an immigration law. And the proof for that is not in anything other than the fact that in the United States, when you're accused of a crime, you're provided counsel for fighting that crime. Now, if you are accused of having violated an immigration regulation, then you are not provided counsel. So my issue is the fact that in unilaterally starting to treat this as a criminal issue. So, the Trump administration wants it both ways. On one hand, in the public forum, they want to say, okay, if you violated an immigration regulation, you're a criminal. You're a criminal and you should leave. You're undocumented and therefore you're a criminal, right? They say that. At the same time, when these people are going through, going through the court system, because immigration is considered a civil matter, they're not provided counsel with which they can fight whatever accusation has been made about them not following some immigration regulation. So you can't have someone being, if you're going to consider them criminal, then okay, let's give all of them the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, as the Constitution of the United States says, and then they can fight their issue in court, and if they're found guilty of it, then we can deport them. We have a system to do that. But you can't have it both ways, where in the public realm, you're calling them criminals, but in court, you're saying, oh, no, this is a civil matter. This is a civil matter. So they don't get a lawyer. They don't get a lawyer to fight the charges that we've put upon them. So that's as a lawyer, that's the kind of sleight of hand that perturbs me, because either give someone the full rights that they have under the Constitution, because you're saying suddenly now immigration violations are criminal acts, or acknowledge the fact that they're not criminal acts, they're civil violations, and people who commit them are not criminals. So you can't have it both ways legally. And the fact is that that's the game that the Trump administration is playing. So on one hand, everyone's supposed to they're normalizing the fact that everyone who has an immigration violation is now, a criminal, like someone who's, murdered 6 babies. You're essentially saying that that's the same thing. But at the same time, in court, you're going to give the person who's killed 6 babies a lawyer, but you're not going to give the person who's overstayed their visa a lawyer. So these are games that the Trump administration is playing. And like I said, it's a very clever game, because most people in the United States do not know how the immigration system works. It is a complex system. It's difficult even for other lawyers who have not practiced immigration law to understand how the system works, let alone like the regular person. And so it's a way of othering. It's a massive way of othering, because essentially you're saying that the millions of people here who are either immigrants or are on some sort of visa are now lesser people, essentially lesser people with lesser rights, simply by virtue of the fact that they are on a visa or that they are immigrant.
Yeah, and I know in your piece you write extensively about JGG versus Trump, class action lawsuit by 5 Venezuelan men, and one of the big stories of this regime. You mentioned Miller. What do you think drives Miller? A lot of people have compared him to fascists in early 20th century Europe.
Right.
I've always been slightly dubious of the fascist word when applied to Trump. Perhaps with Miller, it's a bit more accurate. What drives someone like Miller? Is he just a hateful character?
No, I think he genuinely believes that white people are the best kind of people, the most superior people, and the United States belongs to white people, and everybody else should leave. That's basically what he believes. And he detests the fact that there are non-white people in the leadership of institutions, that the Ivy League is full of people who are not white. He basically wants everything in America, all the advantages, all the opportunities to be reserved for white people, and for everyone else to be a second-class citizen, and to only be here to the extent that we serve white people like him.
His background is Jewish, and I know there are a number of American Jews who are deeply ashamed of Miller.
Yeah, I mean they're ashamed, but not enough of them are raising their voices against him is the problem. And I think the administration has been very clever in using the anti-Semitism trope to justify its white supremacy. And unless there is more sort of public conversation about this, and I mean I hesitate even here to have this public conversation, because the second you say that, you are immediately imputed with anti-Semitism, which is a very and that there's a reason why the piece is called The Great Silencing. And it's very unfortunate, because this is all political speech, and it is directly protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and yet we are in this situation. So I mean I urge all and I agree, and I know that there are many Jewish Americans who are extremely perturbed by this, and I hope more and more of them are going to raise their voices.
I want to come back to the quote unquote resistance. But you said earlier that you think Miller wants to throw all non-whites out of the country. I mean, there are tens of millions of African Americans and Hispanic people who are here legally. Are you suggesting that once he deals, if he does indeed deal with these undocumented people, then he's going to turn his attention on Black Americans?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, already the administration has, made many, many attempts. I mean, the evisceration of DEI, the closure of all sorts of offices that are, reserved for civil rights claims. I mean, the onslaught continues. It's not either or, it's and. I mean, it's. It, African Americans in the United States have already been ensnared in webs of poverty, neglect, failure to recognize their rights,
But that's very different from,
ghettoization.
as you said, asking them to leave. I mean, where would they go?
Well, they haven't been asked to leave, but they have been ghettoized for so much of U.S. history, and now they're being erased. I mean, the names of African American women have been wiped out from the Arlington National Cemetery website, on all sorts of other government websites. So there's an erasure there that is taking place as we speak, and they and now they've started the second front, which is the undocumented front. And so the idea is that everybody who is not white, I mean, and the ones who do manage to stay, are going to be treated as lesser citizens with fewer rights. And as we all know, George Floyd was an example of that. African Americans already do not enjoy the same rights that white Americans do. There's rampant racism everywhere in the United States. And now, these other legal fronts are being opened up against them. And so far as the history is concerned, there's a very engaged and concerted effort to erase African Americans from the history of the United States.
This school that you're representing, I guess, is a controversial one, of course. You talk in your piece about the transformation of the American public sphere, but what you're saying suggests that there isn't that much of a radical transformation. Things have always been a little bit like this. We've done a number of shows on how Trump isn't really that different, and that the strains of Trumpism and of Stephen Miller go back before the Civil War, even before the foundations of the Republic. Is that your view? Is there something different about what's happening now?
And perhaps I should have been more explicit about this in the piece. But what I'm referring to is actually, you might be familiar with the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas and his book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, in which he argued that the creation of a public sphere that was independent from the state, but that functioned as a sort of check on the state, was crucial for democracy and the development of democracy in Western nations. And what I'm arguing is that the silencing that is taking place is essentially silencing that public sphere that existed as a check on the state. So what you have by these sorts of different little battles that are being fought on all these different fronts, the undocumented, against African Americans, against academic institutions, all of these battles are part of a greater war, in which that public sphere that had many different components, and in which people could, say, for instance, like Mahmoud Khalil, dissent against the foreign policy of the United States, and that they could do so without fear of being detained. Those things are being taken away. So the ultimate goal is the evisceration of that public sphere, so that there isn't that check on the state, and so that essentially it's easier to have a kind of minimalist democracy, a kind of democracy where there aren't, which isn't a liberal democracy, so to speak. So that's what I mean by the silencing, is that silencing on all of these different fronts systematically erodes and eviscerates the public sphere that developed, post or during the Industrial Revolution and after, and that existed independently of the state and served as a check on state power.
I'm just a little podcaster, Rafia, but it doesn't seem to me as if things are that dramatic. I mean, we all have access to The Guardian. The New York Times is running a piece today about Khalil and his first interview since his release. I'm asking you questions that just come to mind. We didn't have any agreement before this conversation. There are many podcasts like this. many publications, convinced me that things are as dire. I mean, I take your point that it's not going to be an overnight thing, but it seems to me as if there's still an enormous in Habermasian terms, if there's such a word, there still is very much of a public space for discussion particularly inside the United States.
I disagree. I mean, I have to really kind of talk to myself a lot before I give an interview like this, because I'm a naturalized citizen. And I wonder if saying these things in public as I am, and writing these things or tweeting these things or whatever, is going to come back to haunt me. I definitely feel that way. And that is despite the fact that I've been a journalist for 20 years now. And, because the issue isn't that they would succeed in a challenge like that. The issue is that if the Trump administration hypothetically were decided that they were going to go after me or someone like me, all that they would have to do is file a case and say, oh well, we found some discrepancy in her naturalization application, and we have some issue with her voicing these opinions, and they could file a case like that. Now, to fight that case, I would have to get a lawyer. I would have to spend a great deal of money to be able to then, respond to all the actions that they would be filing before it ever even went up to summary judgment or to a judge. So the issue is, again, that harassment would, it would wash me out in financially, even if ultimately legally I would win. And everybody who's a naturalized citizen faces that threat. I'm a brown Muslim woman from Pakistan. I face it even more. I write for foreign newspapers. That can be used against me. So the reason why it doesn't seem like a big deal to you is perhaps you don't inhabit those categories. But more than that, it's because the people who have the most egregious stories are not able to tell them right now. And I know many, many of them. And the reason they're not able to tell them is because, the administration is saying things like, okay, well, we're going to take your phone at any port of entry. So if I leave the country and I come back, ICE has the ability to go through my phone. All they need to do is to plug it in for a second, and they have all the data on my phone. Now they can use the data on my phone. So if I sent a text message saying, I don't agree with Trump, or I don't agree with this policy, or whatever it is that I was saying, even in my private communications, they would now have access to that. Now, if they have access to that and they file a case against me, they can use all of that hypothetically, or at least attempt to convince the judge that they should be able to use all of that. So all of these burdens are hanging on my shoulders while I have this conversation with you. And I'm one of the few that's at even choosing to have that conversation. But I know many, many people who are saying, listen, I'm just going to lay low. I'm just going to lay low for the next 3 years so that I don't have to deal with any of this. So the reason why you only see little bubbles on the surface is because people are already silenced, and the people who are most vulnerable are the most silenced. The reason why I have chosen to speak is because, relatively speaking, I am less vulnerable than them. But otherwise, a vibrant public sphere isn't bifurcated on the basis of whether you're on a J visa or an F visa, or whether you want to return to this country after you go visit your sick mother somewhere in Africa and in a travel ban country. But that's essentially what's happened, is that people who do not, who do not have, other than someone who's a natural born citizen, a white person here, everybody else feels some degree of pressure because what's being done is so lawless. And the fact is that to fight these cases requires a lot of money, and the Trump administration knows that. That's how Trump bled out all of his rivals, long before he was president. And that is precisely how they want to bleed out dissidents, is that essentially bleed them out financially, even if ultimately on a legal basis they would win. They would they would have lost so much that they essentially would have been neutralized.
Yeah, as you say, it's the strategy of lawfare. It's ironic. On the one hand, the Trump people are attacking the law, certainly Miller and guys like him, although I'm not sure there's anyone quite like him, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. And then, of course, they're using the legal system to go after their enemies, intimidate them, terrify them financially. The piece, Rafia, talks about this transformation of the American public sphere. You end on a rather pessimistic note. You think that Trump is ushering in a new era in which rights and freedoms are accorded only to the minority of Americans who share his strange and nasty views. The American dream, after all, was never an American dream. You wrote this, I mean, it came out in the June issue, or in June this month in Liberties. I'm not sure if you wrote it before or after the No Kings demonstration last weekend, where they were the largest single-day demonstration in American history. Some people see No Kings as one of the first pieces of good news in terms of this early period in the Trump administration. Were you in any way encouraged? Did it perhaps convince you, the No Kings Day, that maybe you were being a little pessimistic in your piece?
I would say that the No Kings protests were definitely a huge piece of good news for me. I was very encouraged to see those protests because for a long while it has seemed that the larger American public has been kind of asleep at the wheel, so to speak, in terms of understanding just the level of destruction of our institutions and the extent of the silencing that is taking place. However, I'm also scared at the fact that when I speak to average Americans, white Americans in particular, who are my friends, they don't realize that they have the luxury of not paying attention to these things, and that the rest of us do not have that luxury. And I get a little afraid by or I get a little frightened by the apathy that I sometimes hear. Even in your question a little while ago, when you said it doesn't seem that bad, a lot of people think it doesn't seem that bad. At the same time, we're eviscerating the rights of millions of people in this country. At the same time, we're attacking other countries willy-nilly, based on whatever trumped up excuses that we can literally come up with. And so I would just like to underscore the fact that it is that bad. It is that bad. And the devastation that's taking place is very systematic. And I feel that there is an extent of numbness within the American mainstream that I find frightening and that I hope I'm wrong about.
We're speaking on Monday, June 23rd. Of course, the headlines now is on Iran and the decision by Trump to bomb Iran and join Israel in the war against Iran. Are these two things connected? I know you've posted in some detail your position on this. Is there a connection between what's happening in Iran and what's happening in California?
Well, I'm part Persian, so obviously I feel this acutely. And I also will say that, yes, I mean, this is the systematic demonization and dehumanization of brown people. The idea is that brown people are essentially inherently bad, whether they're undocumented, quote unquote, invaders who are coming across our borders, or the people of Iran who actually have done nothing at all to the United States. They were never involved in 9/11. They've never carried out any direct attacks on anyone in the United States since 1979. So the idea is is a normalization of the fact that brown people are bad people. They're evil people. We should bomb them. We should throw them in detention camps. We should send them to El Salvador. We should shave their heads and take pictures of them, crouching on prison floors. This is all part of the theater of dehumanization, and it's taking place on a legal front, it's taking place on a performative front, and it's taking place now on a military front as well.
Of course, Trump did win, and this is your term, he did win certainly a significant minority of brown people's votes in the last election. Why would any, and again, I'm using your term, why would any brown person vote for Trump?
Well, I mean, I think white supremacy, indoctrinates brown people just as much as it indoctrinates white people. And the idea is that people, unfortunately, sometimes identify with whiteness, even though they themselves are not white. It's the idea that everybody wants to either be powerful or be powerful adjacent to the powerful people. Against white feminism obviously is a broader discussion of that.
Yeah, this was your last book, Against White Feminism, Notes on Disruption.
Right.
And what about Israel, as you noted earlier, is one of the third rails, which has become a weapon, or certainly using a word I'm not very keen on, weaponized by the Trump administration. You had a tweet or an X yesterday about, and I'm quoting you, crumbling America, and then they go spend trillions to defend Israel. Some people might argue that there are brown people living in Israel. What's Israel's place in this? Is this, some people might see it as a colonial state, an old crusader state. Is Israel just coincidentally involved in this, or is it central to the narrative?
I mean, I don't have any personal issue with Israel. I just think that Israel is a settler colonial country because it essentially made up of white people from around the world who have gone to Palestine and essentially taken over land so that they could have their country. And the country's now existed for 70 some years, and that, so it exists. And I'm not sort of calling its existence into question or any kind of, I'm not, I am for a two-state solution. But I think that it's the current iteration of Israel and its sort of expansionist ideals are something that are in kind of contravention of international human rights law. And just like all other countries, including the United States, must be held to account for their violations of international human rights law, so too must Israel. I mean, it has carried out the mass extermination of literally thousands and thousands of people before our very eyes. And the fact that nobody is really holding Israel accountable is, as a human rights activist, is a source of great consternation to me. So I mean, in that sense, yeah, I mean, all of that aid goes so that Israel can be a nuclear armed state with a very overhyped military. And that is a danger to Israel's neighbors. As we can see, it has attacked it has attacked quite literally every one of its neighbors in the past 2 years. And so, I don't believe that ordinary Israelis are, I mean, I know that prior to October 7th, there were huge protests against Netanyahu and his policies. I know that there are Israelis who are protesting what is going on in their name, even now. And I wish that those Israelis would have more of a voice, in media and in conversations than they do. Because I think that perspective is unfortunately being sidelined in favor of a very hardline, pro-Netanyahu, pro-destruction, pro-genocide kind of perspective.
Yeah, I don't want to relitigate the whole Israel thing
Right.
because we've had lots of shows on it, but I do want to ask one question in terms of this brown people issue you brought up. Simon Sebag Montefiore wrote a controversial piece in this in The Atlantic a year or two ago, suggesting that whatever one thinks of Israel, the white colonial description is inaccurate because many of the people who came to Israel were from North Africa. They were Sephardic Jews. So is race
And
really...
Sephardic Jews are actually treated poorly in Israel. There's definitely a huge racial barrier within Israeli society where Ashkenazi Jews and Russian Jews and white Jews who have come from Western countries are considered, superior to Sephardic Jews. And I honestly think that if Sephardim were had greater control over Israel, the policies of Israel would look very different than they do now, because this whole, because that level of indigeneity in the region gives people a level of fellow feeling towards all the other countries that border them that unfortunately Ashkenazi Jews don't seem to have.
Meanwhile, in parallel, of course, the Gaza narrative continues. AP today is leading with deadly race for food. Palestinians in Gaza risk harrowing journey day after day. More and more people seem to be dying of starvation, if not from Israeli bombs and the military. How do you think future historians in 50 or 100 years are going to look back at what's happened in Gaza or what is happening in Gaza?
I think this will be the world's shame. The fact that we were witness to what is going on, and the fact that we have not been able to stop it, and the fact that the world has not coalesced, to to make sure that this would not happen, is shocking. I think it will be looked at just like the Holocaust is looked at now. Is that, we were alive at a time when such great atrocity was taking place, and we did nothing. And people will ask, like, how did you do nothing? How could you know that this was going on and do absolutely nothing? I think that is how it's going to be looked at. It will be the world's shame, and it will be seen as, the moment that the masks of tolerance or human rights or fellow feeling just fell, and you could see that the world essentially looked away, even as thousands and thousands of people were innocent people, women and children. 20,000 women have been killed, and the world just did nothing.
Well, I have to admit, I don't disagree with you on that one. Rafia Zakaria, I appreciate you coming on the show. As you suggested, you're risking something. Perhaps we're all risking something. Maybe I'm not even aware of it. But keep up the good work. I think your piece in this month's Liberties, Silencing the Transformation of the American Public Sphere, is essential reading. Keep well, keep safe, Rafia, and maybe we'll have this conversation in a few months. Hopefully things will be slightly more cheerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.